Welcome, everyone, to another episode. Today, I just finished an interview with Robbie Barwick from the Australian Citizens Party. He's a research director with that group. And originally, this was supposed to actually be an interview with Senator Rex Patrick. I had an agreed-upon date with him, and he backed out at the last minute. But I really wanted to go through some of my interactions with him and talk about some of the questions I had for him and explore it with somebody else who's involved in politics, with politics in Australia, and kind of navigate through the greater topic and the greater issue of anti-China propaganda in Australia, which is ramping up more and more and reaching some pretty dangerous levels. So other than focusing on the Rex Patrick discussion, we also talk about Xinjiang, the Xinjiang genocide narrative in general, and also ASPI, ASPI, Australian Strategic Partnership Institute. This is a think tank that exists in Australia. It's partly funded by the US government and weapons manufacturers. They shape public policy, public opinion. They feed stories to the media about China, and they prop up this China threat idea. Thereafter, their sponsors sell China threat prevention weapons to the Australian government, and they profit very well while taking away economic opportunities from everyone else in Australia who suffers from the continually deteriorating situation. We ended up going on way longer than we thought we would. We went on for 2 hours, so we had to cut it short. I haven't filmed the second part with Robbie yet, but I'll be following up with him soon, and you can look forward to the second part, which I'll either attach to the end of this, but more likely to a separate video. So with that said, let's get right into the interview. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Robbie Barwick from the Australian Citizens Party, a research director, and I would have had Robbie on anyways, but actually this episode was supposed to be with Rex Patrick. I had an interview with Senator Rex Patrick, and he backed out at the last minute. But there were a lot of things that kind of unfolded that I'd really still like to get into. And I thought it'd be a great idea to invite somebody from Australia to help kind of navigate through this and figure out what's going on, because there seems to be a real increase in kind of anti-China propaganda coming from there. And Robbie, I've been connected with you for a while, and I get the feeling that you're equally concerned about where this rhetoric is taking us. Would that be a pretty fair assessment?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Like my number one concern is if they poison the relationship between China and the Five Eyes country so much that then a miscalculation can start a war. And, nothing else matters under those circumstances.
Right. Yeah, and that's something we're going to get into also, because Rex Patrick seems to be one of the more aggressive guys on that front trying to push this forward. And he says a lot of really kind of shocking things that we're going to get into. But before we dig into this, I kind of want to explain what happened. So I actually reached out to Rex Patrick on Twitter when he was posting some stuff about the Xinjiang situation. And I said, hey, would you mind if I interviewed you? I didn't really think he was going to accept, but he said, yeah, sure. So get in touch with my assistant. And I said, this is amazing. This is actually really open-minded of him. And I assumed he saw the kinds of stuff that I tweet, that I'm very, very kind of critical of his narrative and the narrative that he's adopted. But as we approached the date of our interview, it took a while to set up. There was a last-minute cancellation, like we're talking, I think, about an hour before or something like that. And no more replies after that. I'm like, all right, is that what this is about? I've experienced this before. I had an MP in Canada who was going to speak with me about the Uyghur genocide motion that he voted on, and last minute, I think they looked me up. They asked some more questions. They're like, whoa, no, we're not going to talk to this guy. But I was actually really looking forward to having an absolutely respectful conversation. I wanted to approach it from the point of view where I think that he really believes what he's saying, despite my skepticism about that. But it didn't work out. So what I did was I asked them, I said, listen, I'm still going to do a video anyways, because I think, there's some really important things that need to be discussed here. And would you mind answering a few questions for me for my video? Or would you rather kind of just not answer them? And I'll say that I gave you the opportunity to answer them. And they said, yeah, sure. But before that, when let me first actually back it up a little bit. When they finally replied, when I kept asking them, hey, what's going on, or can we follow up? this is, let me read this to you. So this is, good evening, Daniel. As you may be aware from Rex's social media updates, the senator and myself have been traveling around South Australia, assisting and meeting with constituents during the parliamentary break, thus delayed response due to limited signal. I don't know if the signal's that bad in Australia. I've been once. I thought it was pretty good, but anyways.
Oh, it is. No, it is.
Okay.
that was a legit excuse, especially in regional South Australia.
Okay. All right. Okay. He has at least another week on the road getting out. You may be aware that the senator is banning imported goods made with the Uyghur slave labor bill, which is what I was under the impression you wanted to discuss. Has changed to encompass items made from slave labor from any region. Now, that's a little bit misleading about why he changed that. I'll get into that in a second. And he says he's happy to provide you with a written response regarding Assange, China, and the slave labor bill. Just to give you a bit of context, I complimented him on speaking up for Assange. I said I really had a lot of respect for that. There's not too many people who are speaking up for him in Australia, and I find it kind of appalling that people are just kind of ignoring him. So I wanted to build a relationship on friendly terms. So I said, I really respect that. So that's where that came in. Now, before I get into the final email that they sent after my questions, I want to expand on why I said that was misleading in terms of saying that they've now expanded the bill to include slave labor from every region. So I looked through the reports that they were working on, and it actually came as a recommendation from someone else. So what they said was Miss Freya Dinshore, a senior lawyer, was saying that given the bill is clearly targeted towards China and is clearly discriminatory on its face, it will expose Australia to legal challenges or a legal challenge. And the merits of that will become apparent as the years-long, expensive, onerous dispute process unfolds between the two countries. There's certainly a real risk that it could be exposed to challenge and eventually not be able to be enforced. So let's be clear here. They wanted to push this bill forward discriminatory towards China, and they backed off because they would have run into legal issues. Now, there's no evidence of actually expanding his activism and his efforts towards other regions. And there's one particular part that's very ironic about that. But they wanted to present that as, oh, yeah, we're fair people. No, you just didn't want to get yourself in legal trouble. So what I want to do now is I want to give you show you their final email to me after I sent them the questions, so that when we go through the questions, you can see for yourself whether the questions are sparse, as they said. So their final, this was their final email. So, hi, Daniel. Thanks for your patience. We've been in lockdown here in South Australia.
By the way, that's not an excuse. Their lockdown was very short. There's no excuse for their delay.
Well, I would imagine you've got a lot of time online available when you're in lockdown.
Right.
Anyways. Yeah, exactly. So much of the material sent to Senator Patrick via Amalia's is commentary, and the questions are scarce. Senator Patrick is relying on overwhelming evidence from a variety of sources, including Uyghur constituents in Adelaide, reporting from journalists at various publications across the globe, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all the usual suspects in terms of promoting a lot of fake issues in the past, but we won't get into that today, and ASPI in reaching his own conclusions. In relation to ASPI's submission, it's one piece of evidence that complements all other evidence. Senator Patrick has engaged with ASPI well before he became a senator and is very familiar with the rigor in which ASPI conducts its research. The senator
Sorry, Daniel. I think that sentence is the most revealing to me in the whole email, because he's owning up to a long-standing relationship with ASPI, as we call it here, and there's nothing genuine about ASPI as an organisation.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And we'll hone in on that a little bit in a little bit as well. So the senator is particularly mindful of the fact that ASPI names a number of very large corporations with supply chains exploiting slave labor in Western China, and none have chosen to litigate the issue. Truth is a defense in Australia in relation to defamation. Senator Patrick has not traveled to China since becoming a senator. The CCP has engaged in the arbitrary detention of Australian citizens who have been critical of the CCP. Let me back this up for a second. So in terms of companies not choosing to litigate, that's very, very misleading as well. I'll get into that in a second. In terms of not going to China since he became a senator, he's never been to Xinjiang. I saw him one of his Sky interviews afterwards, and I don't think he really thinks as a sitting senator that he's going to be detained in China, like the two, I believe there were some Australians on espionage charges taken in. I really don't think he believes that's going to happen. The senator's bill has now moved to become multi-jurisdictional. It seeks to prevent the import of goods made from slave labor from any jurisdiction, not just China. This is a pleasing outcome. If the bill passes, it'll be up to Australian authorities to make their own assessment of the circumstances in each jurisdiction. So again, that was just for legal protection. And although he says it will be left up to the authorities, he is pushing forward the China issue, the Xinjiang issue. So now, before I show you the questions, I'm going about this in a little bit of a backwards way so that you can kind of keep in mind how they responded to them. I want to play a little video that shows that Rex Patrick was sitting in a hearing where they specifically said some people were some people were proceeding more seriously with legal action towards them. Whether they actually sued or not, I'm not sure. There were
that legal action would still be pending. But this video admits, in answer to his question, that there is legal action in response to the Xinjiang claims, which he denies in your letter that there is.
Right. Yeah, let's just play that video. Let's play that video.
It sounds as though ASPI's received a bunch of correspondence from those companies that were named in your report. Are those letters public? Are they something that could be provided to the committee, for example?
I would need to check on that. So you may be referring to the fact, and this is public information, that a couple companies have threatened legal proceedings against ASPI as a result of being named in the report. Some of them have progressed more seriously than others. Some were kind of hollow threats that were never acted upon.
All right, so yeah, I mean, he's clearly hearing that there. Now there were. Let me see here. Let me see if I've got it here. There were companies that were taken off of the list afterwards. So you can assume, so General Electric was taken off, the North Face was taken off, and Rowie was taken off, the car company. 3 were taken off. We can maybe assume that those were the ones who threatened action. But of course, they did it. Yeah.
The other contradiction is the fact that he's broadened the bill to be non-discriminatory because there would have been legal action otherwise. Right.
Right.
So,
right.
His staffer, assuming she wrote the letter. I'm not quite sure whether he wrote it or she wrote it. She's either misinformed or, and I suspect they are, because most of their position is based on accepting misinformation, or they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, it's. So we can clearly see there that this happened. Yeah. And with these reports, too, I'm not seeing any follow-up with the investigations that were done by some of these companies. Like, for example, Skechers, they went in and did an unannounced audit of the factories they were relying on. And they said, we didn't find any indication of this. They were unannounced visits because there was a factory in Dongguan that was listed as having using Uyghur slave labor. The Foxconn also. Yeah.
And didn't a supplier to Nike just announce the same thing? Have I got that right? I just saw another company last week said there's nothing here.
I think there was one. I saw something like that. It's hard to keep up with it. I mean, there are a lot of people. I mean, the problem is there's no actual evidence, and the way that they rely on this, the way that they build their reports is really kind of concerning, and we'll get into that in a second. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's more coming out of the woodwork to say, hey, what's going on? I think some of this stuff probably takes a little bit of time. So before we get into, I know we're going on a little bit here, before we get into the wider picture of the anti-China climate in Australia, let's talk about sorry, I'm doing too much of the talking right now. As we're going through the
Yeah, you're
questions,
right.
feel free to interrupt me at any point, and we'll talk about some of these questions and the implications of them. So I took the questions that I planned on asking him throughout the interview, and I compressed it down into as short as I could into a message to them, and this is what I asked. Okay, I don't have it up on the screen, so I'm just going to read it from my Word document here. So in the email, I said, although Emilia has stated that the slave labor bill is not focused on the Xinjiang region and is globally applicable, it can't be denied that the Senate committee you headed that canvassed the issue around the bill narrowed its focus purely on Xinjiang. Due to this inescapable fact, I think it's vital to dig down into the details around the impetus of the bill. So the first question was, have you ever attempted to make a visit to Xinjiang yourself to see the situation on the ground? We saw the answer to that. I mentioned diplomats have been invited through to Xinjiang and the UN counterterrorism chief as well, Vladimir Voronkov, also toured Xinjiang. Have you ever reached out to any of these diplomats or people who came out with a perspective that differs from the Western MSM narrative? I think that's important too, because a lot of people continually say they're not letting anybody in. They're not letting anybody in, but there have been plenty of people who have come through.
Sure. And people I know in Europe. I've never been there, but people I know in Europe have actually gone. People from Sweden have gone to Xinjiang to attend the tour of the area, inspect some of these education facilities. And the invitation's there for everyone to take up if they want to.
Yeah, I mean, I went by myself as well. It wasn't a planned visit. It wasn't like a organized with anybody. But halfway through the trip, I reached out to people. I said, hey, listen, I've got, this is what I do. I have a YouTube channel. And I managed to get a little bit of extra usage from the fact that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had used one of my videos. So I said, hey, look, this is some of the stuff that I do. Even your Ministry of Foreign Affairs used it. And they said, okay, all right, so let's go for a tour. Where do you want to go? So again, part of it I did by myself, exploring by myself, talking to people on my own. But for that, I said, listen, there's some coordinates that I want to visit that they're saying are concentration camps. Can we go to them? They said, yeah, sure. They said, you can even go by yourself. You can take a taxi if you want. And I said, no, I want to go in. I want to go inside. And they said, yeah, we should be able to do that. He said, but if these are actual prisons, if they're real prisons, we can't take you inside. I said, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. And I said to them, I said that.
Hang on a second. You mean they can't take you inside a real prison, just like the US congressmen were not able to go inside a real prison in Washington last week, where their political prisoners over the January 6th raid are being held. So
yeah, I don't think they're. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
In other words,
I don't think they're allowed.
You just can't go into a prison. That's the bottom line. Unless you make an appointment, whatever.
I think it took the Congress people quite a while to get into the concentration camps on the border, the Mexican border as well. Right. So when I was going, and I said to them, I said, listen, I said, if I think something is suspicious or if I think some things are being done wrong, I'm not only going to say positive things in my videos. I want you guys to know that, just in case you're taking me along and then all of a sudden you're disappointed. And they said, that's fine. We never asked anybody to only say positive things. We just asked people to tell the truth. And so they took me to every location, and they were empty. Those buildings were empty. And they said they were. I have some video of it. I'm thinking of I'm putting something together and releasing it. They said that they were regular vocational training centers for just high school students, because they have them all over China. Like if you don't get into your high school entrance, you go to these vocational training places. So they were all empty. Some of them were converted into COVID isolation places. So for example, if people flew back from high risk areas, these were the quarantine facilities. And I wasn't sure, like, should I believe it or not? I don't know. It's possible they're lying. It's possible they were the actual de-radicalization centers, in which case, with them being empty now, it lines up with their story that they're all closed now. So on the final day, I said, okay, listen, you keep saying that they're closed now because you built a better vocational school. Can you take me to that? And they said, yeah, sure. And we drove outside of it, and it was a regular school. It was bigger with facilities and stuff like that. So, yeah,
you've had a similar experience there in terms of being told you could go where you wanted to go. that Jerry Gray attests to in his videos about riding around Xinjiang. No one told him where he could or couldn't go. And you're both non-Chinese people. Jerry's from Australia and Britain. You're from Canada, but the populations of our countries are just pre-programmed not to believe what you say, and I just find that shocking.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. But as I was going through this, I was imagining, like, if I was a BBC reporter, how would I do this? So, for example, there's one vocational training center which was built with funds from the World Bank. It's massive. It's, and you can see, you can go on their WeChat official account. You can log into it and you can see they're high school students. There's a job fair at the end of it and everything like that. It seems like a regular school. But they were building an extension on the side that was under construction, and so we stopped there, and I wanted to walk in, and I was together with a Uyghur friend, and then there was a Uyghur woman, a guard, standing at the door because there was supposed to be some dump trucks coming soon, and she stopped me. And she's like, no, this is under construction. There's stuff coming and things like that. And you can clearly see there's nothing in there. I said, wow, if I was a BBC reporter, I know what I would do with this. I said, the only problem is this is like a 50-year-old Uyghur woman security guard. I would first check to see if there's another entrance with some more intimidating looking guys and then try to push my way in. you know? These are the way that these things.
It is. Well, and I'll like, this is a total diversion, but as an aside, I met someone recently who has her political issues overlapped mine, and we became good friends. And she was telling me about an experience she had in her family, where she was involved in quite a disaster a few years ago, and it attracted the attention of tabloid television. And tabloid television is that it's called foot in the door television, right? They come and harass you, shove the camera in your face. They want to get your reaction, and she said after going through that experience, she never believes anything she sees on TV, any of these puffed up scandals ever again, because once it happened to her, she saw what they do, right? This is what the media. So plenty of Australians can have that experience with Australian media here and realize you people are a pack of liars. You just want a certain image, etc. That happens in China and against any other targets, not just China, but now China's the main target. That happens all the time. But and people need to see that that's the ploy. That's the method they use. But usually they don't.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. Like, I remember a comment on my YouTube channel as well. There's a guy who's living in Hangzhou, and BBC, I think it was Panorama, or I can't remember the channel name, the program name, reached out to him and said, because they saw he was doing some vlogging. He said, we want to find out from you what kind of draconian kind of policies were put in place, and how was your freedom affected? And he was like, yeah, sure, I can talk to you guys. But actually, everything was really good. It was positive. They controlled this really well. He never heard from them again. That's not the
story they want. No. That's not right.
Yeah, that's not what they're looking for. So it is really remarkable how they mold this. But you know what? Yeah.
Look at Rex Patrick's excuse for not going to Xinjiang. Because we've just described people get to go to Xinjiang and have that experience that you've had. Rex Patrick's excuse is entirely convenient, right? Because he doesn't want to go to Xinjiang. He's actually. I don't think his position is genuine at all. It's only genuine insofar as he's representing the interests of people who've lobbied him on this issue. But he doesn't want to debate you, and he doesn't want to go to Xinjiang because he doesn't want to be confronted with the fact there may be, and he's not a dumb guy. He would have already known, and we've made sure he knows, that there's a different version of this story, Rex, right, before you get carried away in Parliament. But he actually doesn't want to confront that face to face. So here's a convenient excuse. China is arbitrarily detaining Australian citizens who have been critical of the CCP. They love this, it's all the CCP. Well, I'll give you a little bit of context for that. There were at the end of 2019, there were two Australian politicians who were going to go on a China tour. And at the last moment, the Chinese government said, no, you're not welcome. And those two are Andrew Hastie and Senator James Patterson. And they are the two most extreme anti-China people in the parliament, right? They had just spent and an inordinate amount of time whipping up all this anti-China hysteria to pass the foreign interference law we can talk about in a little bit, right? And by that time, that was the end of the year that had been dominated by the Hong Kong issue, etc. China had just lost patience and said, no, forget it, you're not welcome. So suddenly, China's not allowing, free, visit of people who may be critics of the CCP. So that he's put that together with the fact there are 2 Australians that you can name who are detained at the moment in China. One of them is a gentleman who he used to work for Chinese intelligence, and in Australia he's worked for he hangs around with, at least, all the people associated with Australian intelligence. And back in China, he's charged with espionage. Well, there's probably good reasons to believe that he is involved in espionage, Daniel, right?
Right.
And given that in America they're charging academics, some professor in Kansas who teaches welding has just been charged with espionage, right? And the
one of the
FBI
guys was cleared. Yeah, one of the guys was cleared. Yeah, that's right. They're retrying him again.
They're retrying him again, but this guy this Chinese Australian guy, you look at everything he does, you think, well, sorry, the people you hang out with, you probably are involved in that, right? So there's good reasons for that. The other one is less well known. It's this woman who's a CGTN host who's been
right. Yeah.
But that happened at exactly the same time that our intelligence agency in Australia, ASIO, raided Chinese journalists in Sydney. They raided their homes, burst in there, did all the scary stuff to do with the raid. And the Australian people did not find out about that for 2 months. It was kept secret by the government, by the intelligence agencies and the media, until Bill Birtles and Mike Smith, 2 Australian journalists, supposedly had to flee China in a hurry in September last year. Yeah. And then it came out that 2 months earlier, ASIO had been able to raid these Chinese journalists. Well, I look at these actions and I look at the what's her name in Canada, the daughter of the Huawei founder, Meng Wanzhou. And we tolerate, we accept that we can do this stuff and there's no problem. And then we scream when China retaliates. And that's the climate that exists now. There's no trust, but that's what gives Rex Patrick the convenient pretext to say, I can't go there. I'm a big, brave critic of the CCP. They'll arrest me. No, they won't even invite me.
Yeah, exactly. Like, who are you? No, right. There's of course issues with every country has its issues with the processes. There's a transparency issue that we can complain about on the China side, but what we do in the West, it just has more fancy dressing around it. Do you think these people really have a chance? Do you think Julian Assange and these people are really getting a fair shake according to proper democratic systems? No, they're not. So when you look at it that way, no, for sure.
We're more sophisticated here because we do cover it up, and in China, their lack of transparency is sort of transparent. In a funny way.
Exactly. I think there's a bigger picture too, because they know that, for example, when those 2, the most extreme anti-China people, they said, don't even come here. There's probably a certain point when a government gets frustrated where they're inviting all these people in and they're not reporting on what they see. They're twisting it to a certain narrative. They're trying so hard. For example, the BBC report on the vocational training centers. They say, this is a prison and they can't go home. And then, towards the end, they're literally showing people going home on buses on the weekends. And they don't retract the original statement. They're saying, "Oh, okay, we were wrong. They're going home." They just say, "Oh, it attests to the scale of this operation. Look, they've got buses for them too." It's like, and then.
Well, what about this? Just on the grounds of being insulting, one of these 2 politicians, Andrew Hastie, a few months earlier had compared China to the Nazis.
Oh yeah,
and then he wants to go on a tour. No. Go away. Why would we invite you on one of these tours if you give speeches in London calling us the Nazis?
Yeah, I think definitely based on those grounds, if Rex tried to go there, he would probably run into those issues too, where they're just like, no, you can't come. I mean, if you look at the stuff, so we'll take a little bit of break from reading through my questions. If we look at some of the stuff, talking about abandoning the one-child policy, with Taiwan, like he's like hitting all these red lines, trying to really kind of push this issue. He's also the one saying, boycott the Beijing Winter Games. There's another one here. Let me see if I can find it. I don't have it here, but basically he was saying, no, I don't have it. Oh yeah, here we go. He called for Australia to launch cyber attacks on China. Like, I mean, if I was doing this as an individual person, saying, like, promoting the idea online of launching cyber attacks against America or something like that, I think I would be put on a terrorist list. I think that's not acceptable. And this is a senator. Now, he's saying this is for, retaliation purposes. They're saying China did this. But before we get into that, there has been constant accusations of this with no actual evidence. And you were telling me that even one time there was a case where it was an unplugged router or something like that. And they're like, oops.
Look, it's a bizarre little chapter in our history, but it was in 2016, and you got to appreciate 2016 this happened less than 2 years after Xi Jinping came to Australia, signed a free trade agreement and a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement, and addressed our parliament. So the same government was in power 2 years later when we had a census, the 5-yearly census, but for the because of the way the world's going, they wanted to do this one all online. This was going to be the first online census instead of, on that one night before that, you had to, everyone stay home and fill out the booklet that was sent around to you with all the census questions that you mailed back. This one's online. So, and of course, everything's online now. So everyone thought that was great. They outsourced it to IBM to run the whole system. And what happened was that night, people knew that, okay, it's census night. They all got on their computers at once to do the census and submit it, and the system melted down. And the government, that particular minister in charge is one of the most ridiculous, incompetent ministers we've ever had, Michael McCormick. He and the government initially said, this was a cyber attack. This was a hack, and it came from China. But the people who said it came from China were ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and their boss, Peter Jennings. He was the loudest. This is China hacking us. And the excuse, if you saw what I sent you, is particularly bizarre because they even came up with this possible excuse. The reason China might have hacked us is because the Rio Olympics had just happened, and one of our swimmers, Mac Horton, had accused the top Chinese swimmer, Sun, of being a drug cheat. And, of course, there was a lot of blowback from China about their swimmer being accused of being a drug cheat. And very serious people, including ASPI, opined that, and this was on our main state media organisation, the ABC, said, China might have done this as retaliation for Mac Horton accusing Sun of being a drug cheat. Anyway, more serious cyber people said, okay, well, first of all, this can't be a hack. At best, it's a denial of service attack where you overwhelm the system and so it can't function. Right. But the actual denial of service volume, there were two contradictions to that theory. One is the volumes were very low, and these experts were saying, look, every day Australian government's websites, as a matter of course, get denial of service attacks, and they're about 20 gigabytes an hour. Right, that was the volume. This thing happened on the census was about 2 gigabytes an hour. So it's not even a normal routine denial of service attack. And also there was no massive traffic coming in from overseas to those servers to do it. And the experts said, look, what we're calling a denial of service attack was probably just the traffic of the Australian people trying to submit their census forms, and the system wasn't good enough. And when it finally all blew over and they did their investigation, it turned out that there had been a little bit of a security concern that there was this overwhelming of the system because the system wasn't prepared. Some people thought, is this a denial of service attack, because the paranoia was starting to build up by then. and they rebooted the system, and when they put it back on again, they forgot to turn on a router. And when they forgot to turn on that router, the whole system wouldn't work, and the whole census system was down for the night because they'd forgot to turn on that router. And that's what was blamed on the Chinese hack, right? Now, ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, still hasn't let go to this day. Their director will still refer to that as a Chinese attack, right? These are the things that I hate to use the term, but it's a good metaphor. Death by 1,000 cuts. That's what's happened to the Australia-China relationship. There's just been a constant series of accusations that Australians have thrown at China, which is our biggest trading partner, our best customer, right? Where the Chinese love the fact that we're developing a good relationship. A contact of mine who's worked in China expressed to me how when she expressed to Chinese people some of this attitude building up in Australia, they were shocked and saddened by the idea that we thought Australians were our friends. What, they don't like us, right? They're our biggest source of tourism. They're our biggest source of foreign students, and that's become a complicated thing. But nevertheless, a lot of revenue there. Biggest customer in every way, and we've just been throwing dirt back, non-stop. Worse than dirt. We're like monkeys throwing shit in their face non-stop, and it's built up and it's built up and it's built up, and now it's at breaking point. And so and unfortunately, it's become very popular. And so someone like Rex Patrick has come along as a cynical politician to capitalize on that.
Right. I mean, and it's really remarkable when you take a step back and see what's going on. I mean, it in a lot of the cases, it's America or American institutions that are instigating this breakdown of relations, and so all of a sudden, Australia stops selling. Reduces their coal exports. Their coal exports to China goes down, while America's goes up. I saw an interesting meme where it's like, where your prime minister was saying, "Hold on a second, this was your idea," as he's being pushed to like the 300 movie down the well.
Well, that's what he did. He sided with Trump when the Wuhan virus outbreak happened. For those first few months, and America just ignored the seriousness of it, and everybody knows that. Everyone who's paying attention knows that, except for Falun Gong and the Epoch Times, who were claiming that 20 million people died in China from the virus, everyone else in America just couldn't care, right? And Trump in those first few months was actually very complimentary to what China had done. When it blew up in their face, entirely predictably, because Americans fool themselves that they've got a good healthcare system, they don't. It's only good if you're super rich. When it blew up in their face and it started to collapse, and the Trump administration and Trump lashed out to blame, and of course he's surrounded by these people who, whatever Trump's view on China, he's surrounded by China haters. He lashed out and blamed China. The most pro-American politicians in Australia echoed that. Our foreign minister was put on the spot on a Sunday morning talk show to say, because one of our more extreme politicians had said, we need an investigation into the lab, into the origins of this virus, echoing what someone like Peter Navarro had said in America. And she was put on the spot. Are you going to back up your politician here? And she sort of indicated, yeah, it's sort of lip service thing. Oh yeah, we need an inquiry. And then literally the next day, Trump and Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, spoke. And Scott Morrison got off that phone call, and he held a press conference and said, we need an inquiry. We need to send in investigators into China. They should have the same powers as weapons inspectors, right? The sort of people we forced the Iraqis to take to prove to us they weren't blowing up the world. All this really, really provocative stuff. And it just, the Chinese said, no, enough. You just don't get to turn around and lash out at us on behalf of America. And it destroyed the relationship. And what they did is they started retaliating with trade. And that's another story. But specifically, they said, okay, these are the things we do need your iron ore, but why would we keep buying this off you and this off you and this off you? And then suddenly when we see what we're losing as markets, we notice where China's getting it from instead. And it's from America. Right. And as one Australian diplomat pointed out, because there's a lot of concerned diplomats in Australia, like ex-diplomats, older guys who are saying, this is crazy what we've done. he said, guys, America doesn't have our back. If it did, it would say, we're not going to fill up Australia's trade, take over Australia's trade, right? But they are, and it doesn't. To those same politicians, Daniel, it doesn't matter. They don't seem to care about that, and they don't seem to care about the damage they're causing to our trade.
Well, yeah, they don't care about the ordinary person as well. I mean, even aside from coal producers and things like that, when you look at I keep calling them ASPI. I guess the proper name, you guys refer to it as ASPI.
We call it ASPI.
When you look, yeah. So when you look at ASPI, they produce these. So first of all, let's look at their sponsors. They're sponsored not only by the U.S. State Department, by weapons manufacturers. And what they do is they promote these China threat stories, and then they sell weapons to, China threat prevention weapons based on the stories that they've just popped up. They've propped up, and their sponsors win big time. Who loses in the meantime? Australian wine producers and all of these things. And even when an Australian wine producer comes out to say something like, hold on a second, guys, we're going to lose our livelihoods here, you get all these little shills, these little, I don't know what the right word is for them, that jump on them saying, how dare you? There's a genocide going on in Xinjiang that we don't have any evidence for, and there's no mass refugee crisis or whatever, and the few people who are telling us about it left China legally on their passports, which some of them had renewed while they were apparently in concentration camps. But how dare you? This thing is going on. Shut up.
Well,
there was this one guy.
Drew Pavley.
That's it. He jumped on top of one of them.
Yep.
Yeah. So now they're losing their export business to China, and then Drew is trying to destroy their domestic business by slandering them and saying, "Oh, how dare you even question this? You're not supposed to question these Western-sponsored narratives.
We should not be doing trade with a genocidal regime, right?
Right.
Trade doesn't matter. We need to free all those people from those concentration camps."
You know what's disappointing about that is, like, you think, okay, there's some real idiots in the government right now. Maybe we can look to the next generation of people who want to become politicians for a little bit more hope. And then you look at somebody like that, and you're like, oh shoot, there goes that idea. Let me play you. Hold on a second. Do I have it here?
And they're all young, not just Drew. All the worst China bashers in the parliament are all young.
Right. I'm going to load a video here while we're talking about it. Yeah, he's one of the most extreme China bashers as well. He's just going full on. I mean, he seems like Drew is really interested in attention. I remember
Drew's once he was saying something. Drew's a little wind-up toy that wound up, and they're pointing in a certain direction. And the only thing, I think he's probably sincere. I haven't seen any reason to doubt his sincerity, but he has just decided he to adopt a worldview where China is the great evil at the center of it. He fantasizes that he's part of, if he was in the 30s, he'd be the one guy standing up against Hitler. That's that sort of thing. But he doesn't take stock of the fact that all his information that he's relying on comes from the people, the American and British sources, who are literally the intelligence agencies that have destroyed the world in the last 20 years through their regime change wars agenda. They are responsible for the great evil. That doesn't matter to Drew, right? He heard something about Tiananmen Square. He construed the Hong Kong tensions with this terrible Hitler-style Night of the Long Knives crackdown on those wonderful freedom lovers in Hong Kong. And he's heard about the Uyghurs, some exaggerated claims, and that's what matters, not the source of those claims. Right.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I think he's enjoying the stardom of it. I think it's kind of, there was one message he sent me.
He's got a certain personality. He's actually, I said he's sincere, and I don't take that back, but he's also got an obnoxious personality. So, for instance, he came to fame because he was supposedly bashed up at a university protest at the University of Queensland in 2019, June 2019, about Hong Kong. But the night before, the days before that protest he organised, he had spent his whole time on social media, like in the inter-university social media, provoking Chinese students, throwing, hurling insults at them, etc., to provoke them to come to that event and there was a bit of pushing and shoving. He wasn't bashed. There was a little bit of pushing and shoving.
I think I saw they pulled his sign away or something, right?
Yeah, someone pulled his sign away, and then he pushed back, and they pushed back at him, and that was the great bashing. But he had been incredibly provocative up to that point. He got what he wanted out of it, and he's milked it ever since. And he also, there's a lot of wokeness. You know, this term woke. It drives me nuts. Everyone, all the right wingers, everything's woke. Well, if you want to interpret that in the broadest possible way, there's a lot of woke type rules now that apply in society like Australia. They certainly apply on universities, and they're the sort of rules that say you're not allowed to bully people, you're not allowed to racially vilify people, all this kind of stuff, right? And then they've come to be accepted as the polite rules of society. And someone like Drew would accept them for everybody to a degree, except for China. So he went and dressed in a hazmat suit and went to the Confucius Institute at his university to imply they're all dirty and infectious, right? And those are the sort of things that the university had to discipline him for, because he was being an obnoxious little turd. And for disciplining him, it's like he and his followers tried to basically make out that university was doing Xi Jinping's bidding because Xi Jinping doesn't like Drew Pavlik. That's the narrative that Australians have been gripped by, to do this with this little clown, right? And it's just
I didn't know about that hazmat suit situation. I mean, that's incredibly. Yeah. I mean,
it was racist. It was racist and offensive.
And during a time when that's the very reason why people are kind of beating up on Asian people, during the, and that's what he does. I mean, yeah, let me play. I got it now. I have it loaded. A small excerpt from his bid to run for as a politician. Hold on.
People are too worried about hurting the feelings of the touchy Chinese authorities.
I think you're doing pretty well. Do you want to start wrapping it up?
Yeah, just last thing.
Yeah.
What do you have to lose by voting as a protest vote for a young 22-year-old fighter who can't be bought, who can't be bullied, who can't be reasoned with?
Let me tell you, that's not like an. I mean, I compress it down. You can find the full video on his Twitter profile, but those pieces where he's like, what do I say now? Like that isn't from an uncut. That's his final version that he put out.
Version,
and his words are, "I can't be reasoned with." So when we were having hope that the new generation of politicians would be people you could reason with, no, he's telling you, we're gonna take it up a notch.
When I cross swords with Drew periodically on Twitter, and I have been since he staged that protest in 2019. Now, slight backstory: I've been involved in politics since I was a student as well. So I've been at this for a long time. I'm now 46, if I can admit to that. And he direct messaged me on Twitter and said, "Why are you, a 40-year-old, going after a 19-year-old?" And anyway, he's the first. He called me fat and old and bald, right? So that's fine. But my main reaction was, I thought, well, in the aging process, you never feel old. Like, you never feel old in your mind. You feel old in your bones, of course. You never feel old in your mind. So I had to take that on board. But the other thing I realized, as a 19-year-old, I used to have plenty of political arguments with plenty of people. I never played the age card against them, right?
If you want to get involved in this,
yeah, of course.
Do you want to get involved, or you do not want to get involved?
That's exactly. Some guy in his 40s is paying attention, is attacking you. You attack him back. Stand your ground, right? But no, you're bullying a 19-year-old, and he's actually quite a precious petal, as we say. That's my view. I can go public now about my limited experience with young Drew, and most of what I do now is when he does one of these pile-ons on someone, I get involved in going after him because his statements are so damn ignorant, and
they are.
He doesn't like my attention. Fine, stop talking crap, Drew.
I I asked a question, or I highlighted an issue with his argument, and he mistook me inviting him onto my show, like wanting to interview him, and he said, "I don't want to talk to you. You're ugly." And he says, "I'm enjoying myself." Yeah, I'm enjoying myself fighting for human rights and hanging out with hot girls.
Well, can I say, here's my latest information on Drew, though, and this is quite important, and it's not actually about Drew, but Daniel, you'd be familiar with Marcus Rubenstein, who's in this legal battle with a person who worked at our government's Parliament House in the library, and while he's supposed to be working in the parliamentary library, he was using his position to tweet attacks on members of the Chinese community, implying they're all somehow part of a Chinese infiltration of Australia, right? And so Marcus wrote an article exposing that, and then he wrote a follow-up article exposing how one of those tweets was actually doxing, essentially, 7-year-old school kids at a Canberra language school. He had identified, he put up a photo of them, identified the school they were from, and basically implied that school was part of a Chinese infiltration operation as well. And the proof of how bad it was, when Marcus exposed it, he took down the tweet, and he stopped tweeting because, as his boss later revealed to a Senate inquiry, she said we asked him to stop tweeting because he was tweeting in work hours. So that's the story. So now he's threatened to sue Marcus, and Marcus is suing him back, etc. And Marcus, we're really supporting Marcus on this because it's the right thing to do. There's way too much of this in Australia, and it's a big legal battle. People should look it up on our website, the articles we've done, or look it up on Marcus's website, APAC News. He's worth getting behind. But here's why I'm telling you that. Because they had a hearing this week, and this guy, Jeff Wade, QC, which is like the top legal barrister that you can employ in Australia, is a gentleman named Tony Morris. And he's the same person that represented Drew Pavlou pro bono in his University of Queensland case against the administration there, supposedly because they're doing the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party. So this tells you a little bit about what Drew's really into, right? He's part of
this is the same. Yeah, this is the same law firm that's. I don't know if you just mentioned that and I missed it, but they're also they represent ASPI as well.
No. So how it works is, there's the law firm represents ASPI and has done other government bidding. That's the basic law firm. The law firm does the day-to-day work, but then they bring in. I don't know what the American or Canadian equivalent is. They call them silks here, or QCs or barrister. So QC means Queen's Counsel, or SC is State Counsel or barrister. It's the highest ranking lawyer who comes in and actually does the arguing of the case, right? Okay. So not the lower ranking lawyers are solicitors. He's got a solicitors firm that's worked for ASPI, but this is the QC. And the fact that this QC worked for Drew Pavlou pro bono for free, right? Because they cost a lot of money. Like you're talking about $10,000 a day nowadays. I said 5,000 because 25 years ago we needed one for a defamation suit, and it was 4,000 a day we were paying then. So it's probably 10,000 a day now just to employ one of these guys, right? They cost a lot of money. There's no way Drew Pavlou could afford that. So the same people that got behind him in his big anti-China hysterics is the same person working for this guy, Jeff Wade. And it shows you that there's a real operation here, and Drew Pavlou is connected to that.
I mean, they must be. I mean, I can't imagine they're just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. I mean, there must be some sort of a, they're lawyers at the end of the day. No offense, but their time that's being taken away for this must be somehow compensated in some other way. That would be my own theory. I don't have any evidence for that.
Of course, but they're a big. We know the ASPI reveals the money. There is a financial angle with ASPI. I do think that's part of it. The bigger part of it is there's a concerted strategic operation that Australia is the victim of. That is, it's not just the United States, actually. It's the United States and the United Kingdom. There's an organisation in Britain called the Henry Jackson Society that people should familiarise themselves with. These are the hardcore neoconservatives, right? And they have led the charge in the United Kingdom and around Australia, and the worst parliamentarians in Australia, like this Andrew Hastie, are their agents here. And they're the ones that have said, we have to isolate the China economically, right? So that means we've got to start our own supply chains and all this kind of stuff. They want to break the economic. They're the ones that push decoupling with China,
right?
And so there's a hardcore economic agenda there. So it's people like and a lot of ex-military guys. So it's Tom Tugendhat in Britain, if you know that name, Andrew Hastie in Australia, Tom Cotton in the United States, Senator Tom Cotton over there. All these youngish ex-military guys. They're wrapped up in these neoconservative networks, and the big one is this one based in the UK called the Henry Jackson Society, and they want to destroy any chance that, like as a contrast, imagine if America had accepted China's invitation to join the Belt and Road. Like, you could never construe that if America had accepted that was China taking advantage of America. America would be the one country that could work as a truly equal partner with China in building infrastructure that benefits the world, right? Imagine a world like that where the two greatest powers are in a partnership together, building infrastructure, high-speed railway lines, highways, make the world work better. And that's a vision you could have for the world. And instead, these guys have the opposite vision. They want to go back to the Cold War division, and it's got to involve economic decoupling. And Australia has been hit hard by that. That's why the people pushing this don't care about the trade thing. That's their objective.
That's a really good point about how you word it also, with how kind of condescending America's relationships are with their partners. Because you're right. I mean, when the Belt and Road Initiative was coming to Victoria, and it was going to create a bunch of jobs and all kinds of projects there, I mean, Pompeo was on the phone right away making threats. He threatened Israel also for wanting to build partnerships with China, saying that they'd have to reevaluate their relationship. These are countries that don't know what's best for themselves. America has to come in and tell them what to do. But again, like you said, if America was like, okay, yeah, let do some Belt and Road stuff here in California. We've been trying to build a high-speed rail for 30 years, and we still don't know how to do it. Maybe we can work together on this. Then nobody's going to say, oh, China's taking advantage of America. You're right, but that's the way it takes. And especially with Australia, who has long been called America's deputy sheriff in the region, over and over again.
That's our term for ourselves.
Oh, really? Like people say that not in a condescending way. They say it proudly, or
the Prime Minister of the time, John Howard, described us as America's deputy sheriff, and he's the guy that committed us to the Iraq War. Not because Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, though he crapped on all about that, and he was one of the few people in the world outside of Dick Cheney to lie that Saddam was linked to 9/11 and Osama bin Laden. Our Prime Minister did, but that wasn't the ultimate reason that we went into that war. Was because he said our alliance with America is sacrosanct, it's the most important, and we have to go in to preserve the alliance. Right? He called us the deputy sheriff, and the opposition party, the Labor Party, says the same thing. It self-describes itself as deputy sheriff. What they don't understand is deputy sheriff means lapdog. That's what in practice that's what it means. But yeah, that's our description of ourselves. And few Australians get this. They don't get what is it when Indonesia hears that, or even Papua New Guinea or Malaysia. Forget China. That include them all, Philippines, etc. This white country down the bottom of Asia is saying we're the deputy sheriff, boys. I mean, it's obnoxious. It's a terrible way to exist in your neighborhood, right? In the community of countries that form the Asia Pacific. Yet that's what we've chosen to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who constantly talk about them feeling like there is a racial element to it. Australia is China's neighbors, but they don't look the same, and it's the Five Eyes nations are all English-speaking, predominantly white nations that are teaming up together. I think the association you were talking about with the different groups with Tom and all those people was the Interparliamentary Association on China or something like that.
Interparliamentary Alliance on China. And yeah, apart from the token Japanese, and sorry, the Japanese on this, you are token. Say what you like, but you are. Apart from those guys, everyone else is from a white country, right? The white people of the world unite against China, and when you look at the people, they're not nice people. I mean, in the UK, the leader is the former Conservative Party. The UK representative on this is the former Conservative Party guy, Ian Duncan Smith. Right? I mean, he was the leader of the Tories in at the time when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister at the time of the Iraq War. And I keep coming back to the Iraq War because to me it's the moral test of our time. Right? I don't apologise for the fact when I hear a new name making some claim about China, if they're of a certain age, I Google their name, Iraq War, and 99 out of 100 times they were in favour of the Iraq War, right? Well, and to me it's important because I wasn't in favour of the Iraq War at the time. I heard exactly what everyone else heard, and I knew it wasn't proven, and they chose to believe, even if they were sincere, they chose to believe it was proven. And so, having gone through that experience, they should have at least taken stock and thought, well, okay, we've now had an experience where we know that we cannot trust, without question, the claims of intelligence agencies, right? We at least have to put the onus of proof on them. You prove it before we do something, because look what we just did to Iraq. And when those same people don't do that and go around parroting rubbish about Xinjiang genocide, right, that tells me who they are morally. So Ian Duncan Smith was the Conservative Party leader in the UK. And, of course, the reason, Tony Blair, I mean, he was just as bad as George Bush, but he didn't get any blowback from the Conservative Party at the time. He got blowback from the Liberal Democrats, but not the Conservative Party. They were all there all the way with it. He also has his own personal history of forced labour, because he was under Cameron. When they introduced the austerity after the 2008 crash, he was the workplace minister, and he outsourced the claims of people who were saying they couldn't work because they had disabilities. He outsourced to an American company that its job was to check those claims, and if they said no, their disabilities didn't stop them from working, then those people were forced out into the workforce and cut off from welfare. And this led to a big scandal a few years later because something like 4,000 people in Britain died within weeks of being declared fit for work by this American company employed by Ian Duncan Smith. And now he's grandstanding in the British Parliament about forced labour in Xinjiang. I mean, they're such hypocrites. This is what,
I'm going to skip to one part of my question to Rex that is relevant to that as well. Let me see if I can find it here. It's so on point with what we were talking about. But basically, I asked them I don't have it here in front of me. I'll probably bring it up later. But I was asking if, with this effort to broaden the bill to focus on forced labor from everywhere in the world, I said, what are you going to do about ASPI, the same company that you're relying on for all of this information? Because as it turns out, let's take a look here. As it turns out, ASPI's sponsors are using forced prison labor. Here are their sponsors. So what are you going to do about this? Are you going to ask to sanction the U.S.? Are you going to ask to cancel their sports games? I wanted to see, is this really about the whole world? And the very outlet that is pushing these forced labor stories are sponsored by people using forced prison labor. It really is.
And that's a Marcus Rubinstein story, that one that you did. So Marcus exposed that.
He's brilliant. Yeah, he's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is. He has a good news service, APAC News. But this is the problem with Rex. See, and people might be wondering, because at the beginning of this show, you actually referred to the fact that Rex had taken a good position on Assange. And that's true. And if people are wondering, well, how do the two compute? So what's happened with Rex Patrick, if I can explain, is his brand, that he would like people to think his brand is pure transparency, right? So, and with that approach in Parliament, he takes up certain issues. You know, he's spoken out on Assange. He's not the most outspoken in the Parliament, but at least he's on the right side of that. He hits transparency all the time. You know, stop hiding. The government should stop hiding their policy behind, reasons for confidentiality, etc. So that's fine, and sometimes that produces useful stuff. However, I think he's followed that approach into the China relationship because there is hypocrisy in the government's position, and that is this: the government and the main opposition party, the Labor Party, they know our economy is, very, very, very dependent on China. But they also know that based on their policy, we have this huge dependence on the United States strategically, right? And so to placate the United States and the neocons in the UK, etc., they will engage in the verbal bashing of China. Mm-hmm. But when push comes to shove, they, when it gets really serious, they often do the things that say, okay, no, we've got to pull back a little bit there. We won't go as far as the United States because we have to preserve some modicum of a relationship so we can maintain our trade. Because if they just took that away, right, we'd be stuffed. And so that makes for often a lot of hypocrisy. And for someone like Rex Patrick, he zeroes in on that. You guys are hypocritical, right? You say we're under attack by China, foreign influence operations. Well, let's have an inquiry into it. And the government won't have an inquiry, right? They knock back the inquiry. You say it's genocide in Xinjiang. Let's pass a resolution calling it genocide. And the government didn't back the call. They didn't back the resolution. And so that's what he's done. And on the surface, there's a certain logic for that with him. But he's gone from that as his starting point to just get crazier and crazier and crazier in the things that you say. Because, and this is my assessment of him, Daniel, this anti-China operation in the space of 3 or 4 years has been so effective that it's something like they went from 40% of Australians in 2016 or 17, really opposed to China to now over 80%. It's a really, really effective operation. For politicians like Rex Patrick, he wants to get re-elected. He thinks, well, okay, that's where the popularity is right now. I'm just going to hit it. Even if, the thing you put up before where he says we need a two China policy, get rid of the one China policy, support Taiwanese independence, even if that's a recipe for World War III, he doesn't care because for him, he's lost all sort of perspective, and it's all about, I'm just going to hammer this until hopefully I get re-elected. And the worst part is I don't think he'll get re-elected anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's scary. It is like these people have no regard for what this could lead us into. I mean, the kinds of language that he's using, he's the kind of guy that's going to get, I don't know if Australia has a draft if there's a world war, but certainly, you're in a position where in all the previous world wars, there was a retraction of democratic freedoms and rights when war happened. Yep. So when all of a sudden Australians are being sent to a war they didn't sign up for, when all of a sudden their own democratic freedoms are being suspended because you're in the middle of a war, people are going to be like, you know what, we should have really paid attention a little bit more here. Or at least
I've been saying that for the last few years. I'm saying start at that point and work your way backwards, because if you keep the day we declare war, everyone in Australia goes, oh crap, what have we done that for? Right? Yeah. And then they'll be interested in finding out how we got to that point. Well, this is how you pay attention now, and you'll see. Because if you don't question the claims that paved the road to war, we're going to end up in a war. Right? And some of the best intentioned people on the left are the ones that drive me the craziest, because they come along and pay lip service to claims like Xinjiang, happy to call it genocide, but then they'll write books saying tut tut tut, but this is going too far. Well, maybe just stop and question the actual claims first. But they're too politically correct to question the claims.
Yeah, nobody's coming from it with an honest perspective. And I think this is, although China has opened up a lot more than people say, they're saying they're not letting anybody in and stuff like that. They have. I would personally, if it was me, if I was in charge and nothing was going on, and I had this situation, I would be really, really conservative about who I let in, and I would start getting less and less likely to really be very open and inviting to these kinds of people, especially the two that you mentioned. When people come to China, whether it be journalists or so-called human rights activists that focus on overseas atrocities rather than in their own government, which is an interesting point by itself, because, you know, people don't like this so-called whataboutism, but you're not changing the atrocious things your own country does when you're supposed to be in a democracy where you're able to change these things. Instead, you're focusing on a so-called dictatorship where nothing changes because there's a dictator in charge. I mean, there's a logic issue with that too, but from a security point of view, when you know that people are coming over not to collaborate, not to say, okay, what are the issues you're dealing with? They don't even want to admit there was a terrorism problem. It doesn't matter that you can actually see Uyghur children in Syria being trained in ISIS camps. It doesn't matter that you can look at the greater region, like in Kyrgyzstan. They also have a terrorism problem in the south, mostly with Uzbek kind of nationals and things like that. They want to establish a caliphate as well. I mean, these are legitimate issues. One of the issues, of course, is that America has tainted the word war on terror so much by the terrible things they did with it that you don't even want to, talk about it in a legitimate way anymore. But when you consider that these people are coming in to not to collaborate, not to understand, but to exploit, to look for things, to prop up. It's particularly dangerous right now because actually I had a guy on who, when in his younger years, he was kind of associated with Al-Qaeda, and he stepped away from that. But he gave me a lot of insight into these things, and he said all the propaganda that's going on against Xinjiang, this isn't new stuff. This has been recycled over and over again. Sterilization.
I watched that interview. That was very enlightening, and that's right. It's recycled. They did it. What they did in Libya and Syria, they're now stupid enough to try against China. But China's not.
Actually, there's two levels here. So one is the Western propaganda, but one is the actual fundamentalist kind of jihadists who have used these claims before. In Egypt, saying that the Christians were sterilizing the women, or the regime was destroying mosques and all of these kinds of things. Now, what's happening is this is the same kind of Al-Qaeda, ISIS propaganda playbook being propped up by Western media. So when you've got Western media people coming in trying to look for these things to then prop up, it is helping the rallying call that some of these fundamentalists are relying on to establish this East Turkestan kind of
and we took Rex Patrick on about that, and the worst part of that is this: until China became the whipping boy in the last few years, we had a parliament where, on the conservative side especially, it was filled with people who spent the last, since 9/11, just Muslim bashing like you wouldn't believe, right? And it was, Muslims. There was a Muslim invasion of Australia, et cetera, et cetera. And those same people then turned around and started China bashing. And I used to make jokes, boy, the Muslim community probably feels relieved, thinking good old China taking the heat off us now, because they really copped it from these politicians. But then when those same politicians, the very same ones that had been Muslim bashing, suddenly become the advocates in Parliament for the East Turkestan Australian Association, which is linked to known terrorist sympathisers, and we exposed who they are. And in this article, we named two politicians, Andrew Hastie, who was a known Islamophobe, and less because of his previous position, Rex Patrick, because Rex Patrick comes from South Australia, where the largest Uyghur expat community is in Adelaide, and that's the headquarters of the East Turkestan Australian Association. Any other Muslim organisation in Australia, Daniel, if they had on their websites what the ETAA has on its, ASIO would be certainly keeping them under intense scrutiny. Our intelligence agency would be watching them intensely and regularly raiding them like they do to similar organisations in southwest Sydney. But because the ETAA's links to terrorist sympathisers is anti-China, they're not just given a free pass. They have people championing them in the Australian Parliament, including the Assistant Defence Minister. Right? So we took this on And guess what? Nobody covered it. I mean, when the Chinese Foreign Ministry quoted our article, and then there was a little bit of press coverage in Australia because the Chinese Foreign Ministry quoted an Australian organisation, but in its own terms, this huge contradiction, right? 3 years ago, if I had said what we said about the ETAA, they would have been all over it. Oh, Muslims, see, there's a Muslim infiltration of Sydney. But not now, because it's anti-Chinese and that trumps everything.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Pompeo is probably one of the most extreme ones. I mean, he was extremely Islamophobic in his comments before, and all of a sudden, cares about the Muslims. There's another guy in Australia, a far right-wing guy who was an Israeli soldier, Avi something.
Avi Yemeni.
Oh, that's it. And all of a sudden, like he was like yelling at people, calling them terrorists. He was putting stickers on the sides of things, like with these really Islamophobic things. And then all of a sudden, when this stuff is going on in China, he cares about the Muslims. Yeah, it was unbelievable. Then the bigger issue is with these terrorist organizations, like you're talking about. The U.S. delisted ETIM off of their terrorist list. Yep. People are now trying to whitewash them and saying, well, the ETIM never really existed. A lot of people are saying that. Yeah. It's like in 2018, you have videos of their generals saying they did an airstrike on ETIM in Afghanistan. In Syria, in 2016, 2017, just east of Aleppo, there were a lot of Uyghur fighters there. U.S. and U.S. coalition forces did an airstrike there. 1,600 civilians died. I was just watching a video of a little girl, a 3-year-old girl. Her whole family was wiped out, and she lost her leg. She gets a new prosthetic replacement every 6 months now. This was on a town that had many Uyghur fighters, and this was America's way of dealing with the terrorism issue. So they admit that back then they were willing to admit that this is what's going on. They're not going to do these re-education programs or any of this kind of stuff or jobs training. They come in with missiles, and there's going to be 1,600 other civilians, innocent civilians, that die along with you. It's really infuriating. It's incredibly infuriating when you look at this.
That's the word.
It is infuriating. And when you look at this, look at this. This is Rex Patrick standing with an East Turkestan flag. This isn't about improving human rights in China. This is about allowing these groups to set up their caliphate in Xinjiang. I've had some of them admit to me that after they take over, they will ethnically cleanse the lands. They'll send even out the Mongols who have been there longer than them in the Tian Shan Mountains. Look at NED. NED is NED is the National Endowment for Democracy, basically a U.S.-funded agency, which its original founder said what the CIA used to do covertly, they now do through the NED. They admitted to spending over $9 million up until this point to Uyghur groups. But when they draw the flag, they cut it out from China and they put the East Turkestan flag over it. Again, this is not about human rights in China. This is about allowing these separatists to succeed. This is about promoting terrorism. The U.S.
And it's why it's why China has strong grounds to deny these people a chance to visit. There was one of the most anti-China journalists in Australia is a smart aleck named Peter Harcher. And he's just got a long track record of doing this stuff. He made an admission, though, a year or so ago about when he was beating up Chinese foreign interference in Australia, etc. And he made an important admission that most people don't get, that even if what they accuse China of doing to Australia is true, which he was saying it's true, they're coming in and they're infiltrating, they're trying to keep an eye on everything. They're trying to control the Chinese diaspora community here, etc. That is actually a defensive action by China, not an offensive action, because they're not doing it to take over Australia. They're doing it to control the things that might be used in Australia to take over them, because there is no Chinese equivalent of the NED. China doesn't have a department dedicated to bringing down the American government or the Australian government or the British government, right? It's not trying to do that. We are trying to do that to it. There's there's another senator that I keep crossing swords with. She's one of these Wolverines. Have you heard about Wolverines?
No.
Oh, really? Brace yourself. I got to tell you a funny story. We have a little gang, a little pack of politicians in Canberra who call themselves the Wolverines. And they've named themselves after this 1985 movie with Patrick Swayze called Red Dawn, where Patrick Swayze led this band of teenagers fighting a communist takeover of America. right? So it's a fantasy movie at the second peak of insanity of the Cold War in the Reagan years, right, when everyone thought it was all about to happen again, etc. And they called that in that movie, they called themselves the Wolverines. So you've got these young politicians in Australia, the ones we've been talking about, Andrew Hastie, Senator Patterson, the ones that got denied entry to China, and some older guys as well, like Erica Betts, this extreme liberal in Tasmania, and this Labor Senator Kimberly Kitching, and they've formed a group to fight for Australia's sovereignty, and essentially what that means is they're anti-China, and they're so juvenile. They have these little stickers of claw marks, and they go on around Parliament House, our Parliament House. They put the stickers on the walls to mark the territory where they've been. We're the Wolverines, and we're here fighting China. Yeah, and they're the ones involved in interparliamentary alliance against China and all that kind of stuff.
It's like their version of taking a leak against the wall. That's how they're marking their territory.
That's right. They're marking their territory, and they got this fantasy view of the world that's informed by the worst kind of Cold War-ish propaganda, but the big thing is sovereignty. We're here fighting for Australia's sovereignty. Yet last year, they made the US ambassador an honorary member of their pack. So their definition of sovereignty is not Australian independence, right? It's they're making their view of sovereignty is what serves Anglo-American strategic interests in their fight against China. That's how they define our sovereignty. Whereas I know very well. I mean, one of our former prime ministers, Malcolm Fraser, died in 2015. I got to know him very well. He wrote a book called Dangerous Allies, and that name was referred to the United States and the United Kingdom. Right? The kicker of the book was Australia needs America for security. Australia needs an alliance with America for security, but Australia only needs security because it's in an alliance with America. That's what he said. That's what he said in his book. But he was the prime minister in the 70s when the Cold War was at its peak. He was the minister for the army in the Vietnam War. He sent Australian soldiers to Vietnam, right? So he was a Cold War warrior like the rest of them. But when the Cold War ended, he said, good, this is the world we want. We don't want a Cold War. Let's all get on now, right? And he had an independent streak that a lot of politicians of his generation did. They were happy to be in alliance with America, but they were clear, you don't tell us what to do, right? We'll be in an alliance, but we're an independent country. That's all gone now. Nobody in Australia has an independent streak in them in our parliament, and these people are the most extreme form of it.
And they call themselves the Wolverines or the Wolf Pack. Wolverines.
Wolverines. That was the name from this movie in 1985.
So they're the real Wolf Warrior, Warrior diplomacy. But they're just confused wolves. That's all.
That's right. That's right.
That's interesting what you said about somebody being involved in the war so much, and then all of a sudden kind of changing their position afterwards. There was one here that you shared with me, Duncan. You know, when he was. So this is. Do you want to explain a little bit about this?
Yeah. So read the title, Foreign Interference, More of an Existential Threat to Australia Than Terrorism, ASIO Chief. So this is 2018 when he's saying this. And that man's the head of ASIO, Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, which is our domestic spy agency. And, of course, it's a member of the Five Eyes, right?
Right.
And we have traced all of this, essentially, all of this anti-China stuff back to ASIO and the Five Eyes. The whole anti-China orientation of Australia is itself foreign interference. Right, we have the CIA and MI6 through the Five Eyes have been able to turn Australia like this, and we've documented. We've got a great researcher, Melissa Harrison, who wrote this series of articles. They're all on our website called the China Narrative Series that documented how this was done in creating this turnaround. And ASIO was behind it all the way. And so essentially, they manipulated us to follow the change that America declared first, actually at the end of Obama. It was Obama's final act of as a president, where whatever the foreign policy paper or the defense paper that his administration did said, China and Russia are a greater threat to us than ISIS.
The pivot to Asia.
China and Russia, and we were essentially forced to follow that, and it was through ASIO. So they whipped up all this stuff. There was everything was based on a beat up. But he was the head of ASIO in 2018. Now, he was the head of the organization. He had to convince the parliament to pass this law. And the law was reviewed by, there's a law on foreign interference where they now have powers to stop foreign interference. And a lot of what's called foreign interference is just it's just any friendly attempt to cultivate soft power and good relations with a country, which countries have always done since the beginning of time, can now be construed as foreign interference. And it gets bizarre. America got so paranoid about foreign interference from Russia that when they made a big deal about that, there was a group of young people from our Labor Party went over to the United States to work on Bernie Sanders' campaign. And the head of the DNC, who didn't like Bernie Sanders because he's a lefty, accused Australia of foreign interference because we'd done something that Australian young people have done for a century, going and just working on American campaigns. It gets ridiculous. So they beat up all this stuff, foreign interference, and they passed this law. The law was reviewed by the most powerful committee in our parliament, which is the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. The head of that committee then was Andrew Hastie, one of these Wolverines. And he's former SAS. And SAS, I don't know if Canada's got an SAS, but SAS is Special Air Service. That's our elite special forces.
That should be CSIS in Canada, yeah.
Yeah. So Andrew Hastie's former SAS. So is this Duncan Lewis, the head of ASIO, former SAS. And the SAS have a sort of like a global brotherhood, if you will, et cetera. And they were they're sort of inclined to see things in similar ways. People were questioning why Andrew Hastie was, as a Liberal member of Parliament, was closer to this head of ASIO than he was, and keeping this head of ASIO more informed than he was his own government. Because, in fact, he was involved in an operation to get this law passed, even if it had political consequences for Australia's relationship with China, right? They made sure they got it passed. But now, and you saw the headline there, as part of the hype, Duncan Lewis said, this is a greater, and the headline doesn't say China, but they meant China, right? This is a greater threat than terrorism. We'll put up the second headline. That's from the same guy 2 years later. Former, that's the operative word here, former ASIO chief Duncan Lewis warns Australia not to inflate foreign interference threats. And there's a couple of things happening. One is, there's hype and rhetoric to achieve a certain outcome that the people, the real people behind this are very cynical, and they know it's not true. They hype this stuff to achieve a certain outcome. But a lot of the members of Parliament, Daniel, that are the ones that get manipulated, they don't know it's not true, right? And they act, this becomes their worldview. And we get McCarthyism, and that's what we've got in Australia. We have now as hardcore McCarthyism as you've got anywhere in the world. Anything Chinese is instantly demonized, right? And so now the same guy is saying, hey, cool your jets. This has gone too far. But that's the key thing is the operative word is he's former. Because
he's
now
outside of it, he can, yeah.
Yep.
So when you're in that, just like the other guy you mentioned, Vietnam War, everything like that, once you're in it, you're just part of the whole system. And then when you step out, some people have a chance to say, whoa, hold on a second here. That is really interesting. I think the same thing is going to happen if a war eventually happens. That'll be the wake up call for everybody else, where they're like, hold on a second, maybe this wasn't really necessary.
There's there are a lot of formers in Australia that are making a name for themselves now as voices of reason, but in their previous dispensations, they would you think, well, what's happened to you? But yeah, they're not part of it, the machine anymore, and they're able to accept certain things. We have one of the best. They're not all bad too. One of the best interventions has come from a guy who used to have the same job, former ASIO chief plus former defense secretary. He went after Andrew Hastie and these Wolverines. His name is Richard. I forget off the top of my head. He was a former defense secretary of Australia. He was former Australian ambassador to the United States. Like, it was a big deal. These Wolverines accused him of selling out to China. And he came back and he said, no. You guys, you young guys who wrap yourself in the flag and question the loyalty of everybody else, you got to watch yourself. He called their stuff alarmist nonsense. And yeah, it was. Was
that Richard Wolcott?
No.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah,
sorry, Dennis Richardson.
Oh,
that's his name. Dennis Richardson, former Australian ambassador to the United States, former defense secretary, and former head of ASIO. He went out, and this is an older guy who's done it all, right? And he said, whoa. And his intervention was quite powerful. Stop wrapping yourself in the flag. And one of the things he revealed, back to what the beginning of this discussion, he said something very important when we were talking about cyber threats and cyber attacks. He said on TV, he said, don't kid yourself. We're accusing China of doing what we do to them. That's how it works, right? We're getting all flustered about cyber attacks. We do cyber attacks. We're getting all flustered about spying. We do spying. What do you? That's
actually, if I had a live interview with Rex, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask him, because his idea of saying that we need to cyber attack China, it was for retaliation. I said, well, what have you found out that? Okay, sure, that cyber attack was real, but it was retaliation for a cyber attack that you did. It would exactly. That, according to your logic, would it be fine? And worse, terribly, much more worse, if this is how you do diplomacy, tit for tat kind of stuff. What if, for example, an ordinary Afghan, who saw that terrible video of SAS soldiers jumping out of the helicopter, going and shooting a Muslim face down in his fields while he was holding his prayer beads, used his same approach of retaliation, eye for an eye. What if they promoted that idea? How would he feel about that? I mean, it's unbelievable what he said. Again, if I said the same thing about the U.S., we should be cyber attacking them, I'd be on a terrorist list. I'd be on a some sort of a no-fly list over the U.S. as well.
They don't bother to think about those things.
No, yeah. Before we move on to some of the other questions, we only got through a little part of it, and then we went off on a lot of different interesting things here. I found that really interesting. You were talking about there were Australian youths going to the U.S. to help with campaigns and stuff like that. I never knew that kind of stuff happened, but it makes sense. I think everyone in the world should be able to do that, especially in the Middle East and stuff like that, because the U.S. is the world police. The U.S. has bases everywhere. I remember when the election was going on, there was this meme. They were talking about, why does the world care so much about U.S. elections? And then it showed a picture of how many U.S. bases there were around the world. The U.S. is what they do and how they act affects almost everybody on this planet. There are some people who are trying to resist the U.S. It doesn't often end well for them. But if you want to do this, if you want to, be the world police, you should let other people have a say in your elections then, because whoever gets elected is going to affect their lives, and in some cases affect whether they get to continue to live or not. It's pretty.
But I'll tell you, it was a lot more common once upon a time. Yeah. The foreign interference paranoia that started with Russia in America, but now it's about China as well. Both sides are fighting whether it's Russia or China more. But in Australia, it's mainly China. In the UK, it's mainly Russia. This kind of paranoia, though, it serves the machinery of permanent war, and it's just got out of control.
Yeah. No, for sure. So continue on the questions that I had for him. So obviously the question about whether he had to speak with, talk with Vladimir Voronkov or any of the other people who went to Xinjiang and came out with an opinion different than his. He didn't answer that, even though he said the questions were sparse. I think there's probably the answer to that. The answer to that is no. And then I ask, what is the most compelling evidence you rely on to prove that there is forced labor happening in Xinjiang? He didn't really point to any specific evidence. He just said, I've listened to all these people. Then
overwhelming evidence. Overwhelming evidence.
Yeah, that he can't really specifically.
Overwhelming unspecific evidence.
Yeah, exactly. I asked, is ASPI reporting an important part of the evidence you rely on to form your conclusions? Obviously, he's very wrapped up with them. And the reason I'm asking is because when you actually look at their reports, when you actually read through them or you have experts go through them, it's full of all kinds of errors or issues or weird conclusions. I can go through some of them. Like, they show a picture of Uyghurs waving the Chinese flag during to paint, to try to paint it as something sinister, but they don't mention it was during the month of the Chinese national holiday when everybody's flying these flags. They jump to conclusions that because some Uyghurs went to work after receiving vocational training, that it must be forced labor, with nothing to back this up conclusion, this conclusion. Ignoring,
vocational training.
That's exactly what I was saying. Ignoring the obvious possibility that they found work in exactly what they were receiving training for. They leave the word employment out of the translations that they have from Chinese documents because it sounds too voluntary. They translate psychological counseling to psychological dredging. They use vague words like conditions that strongly suggest forced labor without explaining what those conditions are. They paint headhunters and job placement agencies as human traffickers, which could be said of any employment agency anywhere in the world. They deleted some of the companies they randomly listed as using forced labor when those companies pushed back against their unfounded claims. ASPI didn't really address the responses or look at the investigation results from companies like Foxconn or Skechers, who made unannounced auditing visits to the named factories. That was one thing that we had mentioned earlier, and that's something that Jack James, one of our mutual contacts, had uncovered. She's I think the best way to describe her is a Western propaganda analyst, and really did a great deep dive on some of this stuff. They misrepresented the names of International Labor Office indicators they changed it from abuse of vulnerability to being placed in a position of dependency and vulnerability. Trying to twist the words to make a stronger case to say that Uyghurs were in a position vulnerable to forced labor. 1 minute it talks about Uyghurs being isolated because of their lack of ability to speak Mandarin. The next it speaks disparagingly about Uyghurs learning Mandarin. It's like, choose which one do you want, The report tried to draw a connection between the fact that there are more results for labor transfer programs on Baidu since 2014, not because it coincides with one of the world's biggest poverty alleviation efforts, but because it coincides with the campaign against extremism, apparently. And there was another interesting coordination piece going on, too, where Vicky Xu referenced a Washington Post article that hadn't even been published yet. So also raising concerns about collusion and how these things are being kind of coordinated. So he did say that he does rely on ASPI reports and he's aware of the rigor that they go through and stuff like that. But obviously, there are serious issues that need to be looked at.
We did our own article on that. We published our own article on that Vicky Xu ASPI report, which was based entirely on just looking at the footnotes. Right, we went to all the references, and the article just lists case after case where there were complete distortions or twisting of the truth that's in the footnote. If you actually follow the sources, don't go any further, just go to the sources they quote. They're clearly twisted or misrepresented.
I mean, it's amazing because the media, global mainstream media, will pick up these reports after and publish what they're writing in them and publish their conclusions uncritically. But when you read who's really going to read the report? And then the next layer, who's going to really read the actual references and say, whoa, hold on a second, that's not what's being said here. There were people, and when you ask them critical questions, I don't know if this was from your report, Jack James sent this over to me, where people asked some really thoughtful questions here about how the research was done. I'll put them up on the screen and people can pause them. I won't go through them, but really, really reasonable questions about how the research was done, how the conclusions were made. And that's the forced labor thing.
Well, I had one fairly well-connected source say to me, look, the bigger issue for the Chinese companies involved in this is they have this positive discrimination towards the Uyghurs, that if too much of an issue is made out of it, could upset other ethnic groups in China, that there's this positive discrimination against the Uyghurs. So I don't know whether that gels with
I think it definitely does play into it. There was, before they created these training programs, because keep in mind, the vocational training programs were not only for de-radicalization purposes. They did have de-radicalization centers, which included, putting people through those programs. They weren't kept there. They could go home on the weekends. They could apply for leave if they had family matters and issues to deal with. But there were a number of different circumstances that they could get in. They could get in there. They could have been participating in a plot, some sort of a plot that they didn't go through with, or that didn't really cause that much damage. It would be on a case-by-case basis, as I understand, saying, okay, we're not going to put you in prison, we'll put you here. It could be containing, having extremist material on their phones, like, material from ISIS and stuff like that. They would be put through there, which is worth mentioning. In the UK, there was an ex-police officer who was caught with banned Nazi group material. There wasn't a de-radicalization program for him. He just went to prison. He was for having extremist material. And then there's also
we arrest young Muslims in Australia who have who are sharing de-radicalization, not who are sharing radical material.
Yeah, exactly. And then there was another way where if people were truly arrested and imprisoned for something that they did, but they were coming towards the end of their term, but there were issues with concerns whether they're just going to go out and do the same thing, or they weren't sure if they'd really been reformed, they could also go through these this program. So I kind of lost my train of thought. Where did I start with that? I started somewhere with that.
We're talking about the discrimination, but I'm
right. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah. So I'll finish that. So for the optional programs, though, I went way off on a separate tangent there. For the optional programs, they used to have the kind of poor village areas where Uyghurs didn't have many work opportunities. They had a more robust kind of welfare program. And afterwards, they decided, okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to provide you with job opportunities. So they gave them this training and stuff like that. And they didn't get these free handouts as much. But the sense I got when I was learning about some of these different things is that they are kind of secretive about it, because they don't want other people to feel jealous about this, because there is some animosity between the fact that ethnic minorities in China can enter universities, top universities, far easier than Han Chinese. And even there was a case before where there was an ethnic minority in a university in eastern China who was suspected of rape or something like that, or there was a complaint against him, and the police really took their time with investigating this guy, or he really got a lot more leeway than everybody else before they really cracked down, solely because he was an ethnic minority. So when you have these other things where you finally find out that actually Uyghurs are paid more, they want to kind of keep some of those things under wraps.
Well, here's an interesting observation. Someone I know who works in Aboriginal issues in Australia and trying to get young Aboriginal people into employment, etc. He said to me, I understand what China's trying to do with the Uyghurs. That's what I'm trying to do here. And the other side of that, of course, is in Australia, there's a whole section of the body politic which hates this positive discrimination towards Aborigines, right? They're jealous of it, and why should they get special treatment? Because there's a reason they get special treatment. They have they got a much lower life expectancy than the rest of Australia, etc. And it's a terrible, intractable problem that hasn't been solved yet, and it's mixed up with the colonial history and all that. And Canada's got its own, as we know. Right. But there's reasons on paper for this, but people get jealous of it, of the positive discrimination that they get, and it's natural that would be the case in China as well. But no one in Australia wants to look at it that way.
Yeah, no, and then obviously, so not only does Australia have the same issues in terms of that, China has the additional layer of the extremism problem on top of that, which I think is important for everybody else to understand. This wasn't a matter of, separatists or extremists just attacking Han Chinese or things like that. I say just because that's how they rationalize it. They're like, oh, okay, well, they've got a legitimate grievance against them. No, they were attacking non-religious Uyghurs or moderate Muslim Uyghurs as well. That was the real cultural genocide that was going on. Uyghurs that were caught drinking, even though the history of winemaking in the Uyghur community predates even that of Islam in their community, were persecuted by these guys. Uyghurs who didn't want to observe Ramadan, who were caught eating outside, were at risk as well. Like, it was a scary place for these people. When you talk to some of these Uyghurs who were targeted by these groups, or
I've tried to make Australians understand this by comparing it, because even on the official figures, there's and I think there's an American university, I can't remember the name offhand, that has this terrorism database, and just on their official figures of global terrorist attacks, what China went through in the decade from 2007 to 2017 is around those figures show there were 800 people killed in terrorist attacks in China in that decade. 800. That's the kill. There's a lot more injured and maimed on top of that.
Right.
That is about triple what France suffered, which we all felt when France, like, we all went through what France went through in a sense, right? Charlie Hebdo, the rock concert, etc. Same period of time, same decade. All these terrorist attacks in France that were just shocking us completely. You don't count poor old Iraq, of course, and Afghanistan, because they're special cases, but in terms of what the wave of terrorism that France suffered, that we all felt, we all put the colours on our big buildings, etc. when they have a terrorist attack, China endured something that was 3 times as bad as that. And that's not taken into account when we talk about the problem China had to address. All we're hearing about it is the response side and a lot of exaggeration. The minute people take that seriously and take it into account, they would at least think, okay, let's look at this in a more realistic way. And, clearly some of these measures are justified.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lack of empathy towards when these things happen in China. I met one of the guys. His father, he's an imam at the Idkar Mosque in Kashgar. His father was killed by terrorists, and it's a real issue. And then the geographical issue, and then how do you deal with this stuff? I was critical in one of my videos where I had an interview with a guy who had graduated from the vocational training centers, and I didn't put him on camera, even though I was allowed to, but I just felt a little bit kind of, I thought I'd have a more personal conversation with him, and I talked about it afterwards. But I was kind of critical of some of the things that China did and the approach that they had. And they did do some really weird things, like what's an example? So there was one law that they couldn't, something along the lines of, I can't remember how it was worded. People couldn't stop watching like state news or something like that. The wording was really strange. But then when you look at how these terrorists operated, it was a direct response to them deliberately trying to cut people off from society. When you cut people off from society, you create a situation where you can radicalize them. Okay, your women aren't allowed to go outside. You have to cut off all of this. This is going to be your material from now on. So that was their response, saying, no, you're not allowed to do this. But if you just read that without the context, saying you're not allowed to stop watching state media, wow, they just want to brainwash these people. No, they're trying to stop these terrorists from withdrawing them from society. There was one law also about irregular beards. Like, that one is a really uncomfortable one too. Like, how can you regulate people's facial hair and stuff like that? But again, it was, this is my assumption, the particular sect of Islam that was trying to take over here, this kind of Wahhabism and stuff like that, they were trying to prevent people from emulating that kind of a culture, whether it be, I think in the U.S. also they banned people from, wearing their pants low because it represented prison culture or something like that. So for them, this very probably worded in a misguided way said, okay, you can't have irregular beards.
Well, there's a lot of people, a lot of movements in Western countries to ban the burqa.
Oh yeah. I mean, well, even in Muslim countries, in Morocco, which is a 98% Muslim country or whatever it is, they banned the sale and import or something like that of burqas because they saw it as a Salafist Islam kind of influence that was related to a lot of terrorist attacks in northern Africa. And burqas and niqabs, they were never part of a Uyghur culture. So again, telling Uyghurs you can't drink anymore, you have to wear a burqa or a niqab, your women can't go outside. That was the real cultural genocide that was going on. So now China comes in trying to say, no, we're not going to allow this influence to come in. And then they do these, when they showed the celebrations at the end of, at the end of Eid, where people were dancing in front of the mosque. Radio Free Asia comes out and says, oh, they were forcing Uyghurs to dance in front of the mosque. They were paying them to dance. Meanwhile, you can find footage from 1979, I think it is, or 1989, where they've been doing this all along. So it's like, well, hold on a second. They want to preserve. Are you saying they want to preserve Uyghur culture so much that they're actually paying people to continue practicing what they've been practicing for 20 years? It was really.
I love the headlines. This Uyghur is in detention just because they're a Muslim, and you think, I mean, clearly there's millions walking around, they're all Muslims, but it shows you where they've got the Western mindset, right? It shows you what they think of the Western intelligence. People will just believe anything, but the Western mindset such that, okay, we've demonized China so badly, we can say anything now, and it'll just be instantly believed.
I have a video coming. I actually recorded it yesterday. I'm going to put subtitles on it where I talk about that. It's like it's gotten more and more ridiculous because it's based in a foundation of cognitive dissonance that's been cultivated by this constant bashing, where you can put out the most ridiculous things, and we don't even learn the lessons from the first Gulf War of Nayira, the 14-year-old girl who had this tear-filled testimony about Iraqi babies being thrown from incubators, and then the second time around, and she was that was organized by Hill and Knowlton, a PR firm. And the second time around, the U.S. can literally be pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars into this narrative. And we're not, people aren't any more critical about witness testimonies. They'll literally prop up, the number one testimony they're propping up is Tursunay Ziawadan, where her story has changed 3 or 4 times. If you look at her timeline, her passport was apparently renewed while she was under arrest, which is impossible in China. You have to go in person to renew it. But anyways, even if she was escaping a concentration camp, why would they renew her passport? How could she leave the country legally and stamp out through exit immigration to tell this story to the world? I mean, people aren't thinking critically about it.
And she's the one who within 12 months changed her story from I wasn't raped to I was raped, and suddenly
it wasn't raped. It was no physical violence whatsoever. Then it was sterilized. Then it was and then a few other details of her story kept changing, and everybody refuses to address this. The BBC contacted me to interview me about my views on Xinjiang, and I knew it was a hit piece. So I said to them, "Listen, you work for the BBC. You're doing this. Can you at least give me an answer on this, like how this story got through?" There was a petition on change.org with 4,000 people who signed it who also want an answer to this. If you can answer this, then no problem. I'll answer all of your questions. No, they weren't interested in it. I think a lot of these people, they know what they're doing here. But let me we're slowly getting through these questions, but I think with him not answering them is really quite revealing. So so then I ask about ASPI also. I say, if we look at some of the this isn't the shortened version I sent him. Hold on a second. I'm going to skim through this then, because this wasn't my shortened version that I sent him after. But yeah, I also mentioned what I was going to say in the actual interview was that if we look at some of the specific things that ASPI says we can look at, for example, Nathan Rooser, here's an example of his work. He's saying that this QR code in the back is so that police can track this vendor. It's a WeChat Pay code that anyone with a basic understanding of China could see right through. So Nathan Rooser is one of the guys who works for ASPI. Yeah. He's a really interesting one. So he posts stuff like this, like, this is a vendor with a WeChat QR pay code in the back, and he says, "Oh, this is so that the police can track them." This is the level of people they have at ASPI, the level of things that they're putting out. And to go one step further, and we're talking about how people didn't empathize with these terrorist attacks in China and with the fact that they're dealing with this ETIM problem. Well, let me tell you, actually, Nathan takes it one step further. Whether this was a joke or not, this is really ridiculous. He said he was spray painting ETIM on a power box outside of a tanky's house just to keep them on edge. This is the group that killed
it's essentially the same as spray painting ISIS.
Yeah. And I mean, these are people. I met a guy who lost his father to these people. 800 deaths. They're fighting in Syria. their kids are being trained in ISIS camps. They're fighting alongside Al Qaeda, and
hang on, no. Young Nathan should go to New York and go to the Freedom Tower. That's replaced the Twin Towers, and spray paint Al Qaeda on the side. See how far.
Yeah, let's see what happens. Yeah.
Let's make an event. Nathan. Let's make an event of that. Go do that.
This is the organization that has its hand in shaping Australian public policy and public opinion. These are the guys who are behind it. What else did I have here? I wasn't aware of that until you just said then. Yeah. What else do I have on him? Okay, this is something separate. This was interesting. They got this guy. They took this guy's picture, and Nathan was one of the first ones to pick up on him and start promoting him. It was a brand new Twitter account, and he was saying really, racist things against Uyghurs and stuff like that. And they're saying, and they were propping him up. These ASPI guys were propping him up, saying, "Look at how these guys talk." And then I did a reverse image search on him, and I said, "This is a guy from Montreal. If anybody wants to talk to him and ask and let him know that somebody's using his image, here's his contact information." And then they deliberately deleted the account. I don't know if Nathan ended up deleting the tweets after also. But Nathan Russer, he ended up blocking me. So he blocked me when I brought up that specific case about Tursene, because he told me that there's conclusive evidence of a genocide in Xinjiang. So I said, well, can you give me some? And then he shared Tursene's article. And I asked him, I said, are you at all concerned that you consider this new report as absolutely conclusive when it relies on a testimony from individuals who have completely changed their story and added new elements in a matter of months? And then that's when he blocked me. He's like, okay, no, I'm not, I'm not having any of this.
Well, that's right. He blocked me very fast as well.
There's there's another one. There's another Nathan that works there. Nathan Attrill. Attrill, yeah.
The keyword. He's a New Zealander. I think he's just left recently, but he's still.
Okay. So when he was at ASPI, like this is the stuff he would take issues with. So there's an Australian professor, Xinjiang Pan, who debunked a story where somebody photoshopped halal onto this pork jerky or whatever it was, and then he found the original saying, "Look at this. This is what we're dealing with here." And Nathan took issue with that. He's saying he's back at it again. Back at what? Back at debunking lies? Is that really
telling the truth?
Yeah. I mean, that shows you what they stand for. That's an issue for him, finding the original picture that doesn't have halal photoshopped over it. And he's actually an interesting character too, because
imagine it's 2003 and Cheng Sen Pan is saying, "Look, there's no here's the proof. There's no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq." And Nathan Attrill goes, he's back at it again.
Yeah. Seriously. Yeah, so I point out the issue. But actually, this guy's interesting, too, because he knows an ethnic minority from Xinjiang. He went to university in Wellington, New Zealand, with Yang Gao, who is his friend. And he actually invited him. He invited him to Xinjiang, saying, "Why don't you come? You guys have this wrong. You know me. We're friends. What's going on?" Totally ignored him because, again, like you said, they don't want the truth. So I challenged him. I said, maybe what was it in here? I was saying I asked him to do an interview with him and asked if ASPI would let him do that. How about you ask your ASPI sponsors if you can publish an unedited, uncut interview with your old friend, an ethnic minority from Xinjiang, on why he disagrees with ASPI's Xinjiang narrative. And then I asked for permission from his military-industrial complex sponsor, saying, "Hey guys, you okay with this?" Obviously trolling a little bit there, but no, these guys don't. These guys don't want the truth. You know what? How about we do this? Why don't we pick this up again? Because we got a bunch of other stuff we can go through, and we'll make this a two-part. We'll make this a two-part thing.
We've barely touched the sides here.
Let's wrap it up here, and we will continue on part 2, and we'll connect afterwards on the exact schedule. Really sounds good. Catch up with you soon. Okay.